The knock came just after noon, when the lake lay flat under a pale winter sky and the birches at the edge of the yard looked like white ribs holding up the cold. I opened the door to find my father on the porch, standing tall, like he'd brought me good news. His hands, once rough from hauling traps out of the bay, shook a little as he reached into his coat. He moved to my kitchen table and set down an envelope with a kind of flourish, as if he were handing me a present. A cashier's check slid out in clean, stiff paper. The neat print read, $12,000. There, he said, settling into the chair across from me like a man finishing a deal. Enough for you to start over. You can find a place in Portland, maybe even Boston. The cottage is spoken for now, $3 million cash. It was the smart move. I kept my eyes on the check. My fingers found the steel key I wore on a simple cord around my neck, the one that belonged to the cottage, and rested on it for steadiness. The air between us carried his cologne, a scent too sharp for this quiet room. You sold the cottage, I said, keeping my voice even. You've been too busy to manage it, he replied fast, like he'd rehearsed the line. You're running jobs up and down the coast, working yourself raw. I saved you from drowning in responsibilities. This way you can be free. I let him talk. He took my silence as surrender. The corners of his mouth lifted. He spoke about investments, about the buyer, about renovations, about how generous it was to bring me a check instead of leaving me with nothing. He did not know that I had sat in an attorney's office in Rockland 3 days earlier and signed papers that moved the cottage into an irrevocable trust. He did not know that a fraud alert sat at the county registry like a tripwire, ready to snap tight if someone tried to slide a deed through after hours. I picked up the check, turned it once in my hand, and set it back down. He leaned back like the hard part was done. I stood and went to the window. The lake didn't care about our fight. The pines didn't move for anyone's plan. I breathed slowly and let the calm I'd earned over years find my center. Then I turned back and smiled. That was the moment he should have known he'd walked into a story that was no longer his to write. After he left, the cottage fell into that particular quiet old houses have. A quiet that carries memory in the walls. The check lay where he had put it. I stared at it and thought about the winter since my mother died. I was 24 then, old enough to know what loss felt like, too young to understand how permanent it would be. A probate judge moved the cottage to my name with a stamp and a signature. It was called inheritance, but it felt like a sentence. Here, keep this thing alive. Don't let it fall. My father was already drifting by then. He was restless, always scouting the next venture, always hearing about a short road to fast money. I stayed. The house needed someone to love it more than it hated its own rot. The roof was curling up like old paper. The windows swelled and stuck. The floors went soft where water had found ways in. During the day, I worked jobs in Camden, long shifts, honest pay. At night, I came home and stripped wallpaper, replaced joists, sanded boards down to something that could breathe again. My hands hardened. My back learned how to ache and keep going anyway. Each beam I fixed felt like a line of conversation with my mother. I was not letting go. Through those years, my father called often. He needed bridge money for a deal that was sure, cash for a truck repair, help covering late mortgage payments on a place in Belfast he swore he would flip and pay me back for twice what I sent. I said yes too often. I told myself it was duty. I told myself that if I controlled the purse strings, I could control the damage. But control cost something. Every dollar I handed over bought silence. I didn't ask why he needed so much. I didn't press for promises. I became the wall he leaned on, even while the weight bent me out of shape. The cottage, though, did not betray me. Deep in winter, I stoked the wood stove and watched snow stack against the stone steps. I told myself the house was proof. I could endure. But endurance is not freedom. I learned that from a whisper that found its way to me from a bar in Rockport. It was my cousin Owen who brought it. He called late. His voice carried the kind of trouble you don't want to carry alone. He said he'd been at a marina bar, half listening to men talk boats and weather and debt. Then he heard our father's voice. He said my father was bragging that the lake place would be gone by the end of the week. The deal was lined up. The money was practically in his pocket. Owen paused, unsure whether to keep going, then said the words that tightened my chest. My father told the table I was too naive to notice a signature slipped under my hand. He laughed when he said it. That laugh, even through Owen's voice, felt like a knife. By morning, I was in an attorney's office in Rockland, sitting across from a woman named Claire Nguyen. She had the kind of steady presence that calms you before you realize you need calming. I laid out the whole story: his debts, the money I'd given over time, the check on my table, Owen's call. Claire listened without interrupting. When I finished, she told me a forged power of attorney was most likely already moving. If we didn't act now, the county could record a deed before I even knew it existed. We moved fast. Claire drafted documents moving the cottage into an irrevocable trust, with me as trustee and lifetime beneficiary. I signed each page with careful strokes, feeling their weight. She also prepared a fraud alert affidavit for the county registry. "Think of it as a tripwire," she said. "If someone tries to file something that touches this property, it gets flagged for review." When I stepped out of her office, the cold Rockland air stung my face, and I felt something strong solidify inside me. I had drawn a line. This time, no one, especially not my father, could step over it. Back home, I turned preparation into a language. I installed small cameras, one above the doorway, one tucked into the kitchen rafters, another in the office where my father liked to spread papers out as if paper could make a lie true. Their tiny lights blinked like signals only I could see. Claire sent sample signatures to a handwriting expert in Portland. I pulled old tax forms, insurance letters, and my mother's will from a file box and brought them to her. Laid next to the supposed power of attorney, the forgery showed its clumsy seams, shallow loops, shaky pressure, a signature made by someone who thought imitation could replace knowing. Meanwhile, Claire traced the buyer. The account behind that cash offer led to a man from Warren I remembered from cookouts in my childhood, one of my father's poker friends. Money moved between them in little jerks, small deposits, sudden withdrawals, then quiet. It didn't look like a real sale. It looked like a shell trick, and the shells were already slipping. A clerk at the registry, her name was Marta Laird, called Claire late one evening. She'd flagged a packet dropped after hours. The pages looked rushed. The signatures made her frown. She said they would not slip through unnoticed. In that steady voice, I heard what real allyship sounds like: quiet, grounded, not for show. Owen offered to come help set the cameras or just sit with me as I waited. I told him no. Control felt safer than company, and I convinced myself I needed to steer every detail alone. He was kind about it, but I heard his disappointment before he hung up. I hated how it felt to push him away, but I could not let anyone touch my plan. When my father called and asked me to meet him for dinner, I said yes. I didn't need to set the stage. It had set itself. The restaurant sat on the waterfront, all big windows and neat white napkins. You could see the breakwater light if you looked past the wine glasses. My father had picked it like a man planning a celebration. When I walked in, he was already seated, a bottle of wine in a silver bucket, menus laid out like props. "Sit down, Sable," he said, cheerful and full. "This is a night for goodbyes and for beginnings. You'll see." I sat and folded my napkin across my lap like none of this made me shake. He poured wine and held his glass up for a toast. "To your freedom," he said. "No more carrying that place alone. I've relieved you of the burden." I touched my glass to his but didn't drink. He leaned back, pleased with himself. "You should be thanking me. $3 million is a fair price. I've secured our future, and the $12,000 is my way of making sure you land on your feet." The words slid over me like cold. He wanted me to thank him for trying to cut me out of my life. I smiled a small smile. He mistook it for surrender. Halfway through the meal, Claire walked in. She had called ahead to ask the hostess to let her know when we were seated. She acted surprised when she saw me. "Do you mind if I join you?" she asked, light, almost casual. My father raised his eyebrows but gestured at the empty chair. He still believed the cards were his. As the plates were cleared, he loosened up. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was his need to be right. "You know, Sable," he said softly, "your mother always favored you, even in her will. That house should have been mine by rights. I built the dock. I fixed the roof. I paid taxes when she couldn't, and what did the judge do? Handed it to you like I was an afterthought. I watched him. Beneath the swagger, the wound that drove him lay open. He wasn't just trying to sell the cottage. He was trying to erase the story he told himself about being overlooked." Claire and I made eye contact. She gave the slightest nod. The mask was slipping. It was time. The waiter refilled our glasses. Claire leaned forward as if making small talk. "Ronan," she said, "I happened to stop by the registry this week. Interesting timing on documents filed under your name, his fork hovered. What documents? She reached into her bag and set a folder on the table. Inside lay stamped copies of the trust filings. This cottage is no longer vulnerable to anyone's signature, she said. It belongs to an irrevocable trust. Sable is the trustee and lifetime beneficiary. Anything filed after these dates is void. His face darkened. He flipped through the pages fast, as if speed could erase what ink had fixed. You can't do this to me. I had a buyer. The buyer is tied to a shell account in Warren, Claire said steady. The trail goes to one of your poker friends. Funds never entered escrow. If you represented otherwise to anyone, that's fraud. He snapped the folder closed. You think you're clever, but I poured years into that place. Paid bills when your mother couldn't. Sable owes me. The words burned. I kept my voice level. I don't owe you theft. He leaned in, lowered his voice like a secret could save him. You don't understand. I'm drowning. People are after me. I can't walk the harbor without someone reminding me who I owe. Selling that place was my way out. Claire's tone sharpened without getting loud. Forging signatures and exploiting your daughter is criminal. Document fraud? Attempted theft by deception. Financial exploitation of a family member. If the district attorney takes this, it won't go kindly. For a moment, the show fell away. He looked out toward the darkening water, then straightened and tried for one more wall. So what now? You going to have me arrested over dinner? Not yet, Claire said. Prosecutors weigh restitution. If you start repayment, if you cooperate, how this proceeds can change. But make no mistake, your exposure is real. And the clock is running. Silence sank down and sat at our table. He shifted, smaller now. I realized this wasn't a goodbye meal. This was the first hearing of his reckoning. The real terms would be set in the days ahead, when boundaries would have to be written in ink. The next morning, I went back to Claire's office. The file from dinner lay open, dotted with yellow tabs. Claire asked what I wanted. It wasn't an easy question. I stared at the papers, then said the truth aloud. I don't want it swept under the rug. But I don't want him in an orange jumpsuit if there's another way. Claire nodded and began to map the path. We would file a civil case, not to punish for punishment's sake, but to keep leverage. We would outline restitution. He would pay what he could from whatever he could sell. He would attend financial counseling. He would sign a covenant not to contact me about the property and not to try to interfere with the trust. If he broke it, the civil case would move and the criminal referral, already drafted, would go forward. This gives you control and gives him a way to do something other than run, Claire said. I told Owen over coffee in Camden. He frowned into his mug. Do you know what this will do to him? He'll say we're the ones destroying him. Maybe both things can be true, I said. I can't ignore what he tried to take from me. And I can't pretend it won't hurt to hold this line. Saying it out loud tasted like ash. I feared the public part, the way small towns carry stories like burrs. I feared that even a careful plan might rip something that could never be sown. But I also knew that keeping quiet would only invite the next try. Owen pressed his lips together, then nodded. If this keeps you safe, I'll stand with you. Back at the cottage, I started with the locks. New hardware shone against old pine. Turning a wrench felt like more than a symbol. Afterward, I walked the shoreline and studied where the earth had given way this year. Under the rules for this part of the coast, I stacked small stones and planted native grasses, quiet armor against forces older and more patient than any family fight. Inside, I hung 2 frames above the mantel. One held my mother's deed, yellowed paper, her careful script still steady after all these years. The other held the new trust certificate, crisp and clear. Together, they told a story of survival. What was built, what almost slipped away, what was reclaimed. My father tried to work around me anyway. He called Owen and said the familiar lines, family loyalty, how I'd been turned against him. Owen told me later he listened but didn't bend. If you want to talk about money or the house, he told my father, do it through Claire. That sentence gave me such a sharp relief it almost felt like grief. After so long, someone else was holding the line with me. At my next meeting with Claire, I said the thing I'd not wanted to name. The more I tighten, the more alone I feel, I admitted. If I control every hinge and every dollar, nothing can touch me. But there's no room left for anyone to stand beside me. Claire closed the file and looked at me like a person, not a problem. Safety matters, she said. But walls turn into cages if you never open the gate. Her words stayed with me. I carried them into late summer as the town filled with visitors and the air shifted. The farmer's market put out crates of blueberries and glass jars of honey. Families filled the park by the harbor. To anyone walking by, the town was just a set of warm scenes. Private wars like mine don't show in postcards. Under Claire's supervision, my father began making restitution. The payments were small, pulled from wages he made fixing boats in Owl's Head, but they arrived on time. I kept every receipt in a folder, not for revenge, for record. For truth that didn't depend on promises, I needed to do more than defend. I needed to build. I set up a small grant through a local land trust to help neighbors fight deed fraud and title tricks. A few applications came quickly, stories like mine in smaller shapes. Signatures questioned, neighbors coerced. I sat with each one and felt my vigilance turn outward into something useful. For the first time in a long while, what I was building stretched beyond my own fence. Then a letter arrived in my father's hand. Plain paper, no drama. No apology either. Just a request. Could he stand at the road and look at the cottage? I took the letter to the granite steps by the lake where my mother used to sit. The request was small compared to the damage, and still it stirred something complicated. After days turning it over, I allowed one visit. Supervised. He could stand on the gravel shoulder beyond the gate and look from there. When he came, he stayed at the line. He looked up at the roof, at the stone chimney, at the birches moving in the late summer wind. His face didn't give much away. He didn't try to talk around the rule. The quiet he brought with him was the closest thing to respect he had ever offered me. By September, I understood the future I wanted would be written in boundaries, not bargains. A year passed in steady steps. No big scenes. No courtroom outbursts. Just small, deliberate pieces set in place. Each month, Claire sent me a brief report. Partial compliance met, small payments logged, sessions with a counselor attended. None of it erased what he had done, but it set a rhythm of accountability I could live with. One afternoon, I sat in Claire's office while she spread the file across her desk. "He's meeting the terms," she said. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to keep the civil case in abeyance. I nodded. What I felt wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't hot anger. It was something quieter and truer, the recognition that I could not fix him, and I didn't have to. I only had to hold my lines. Back at the cottage, fall edged in. I made a shadow box for the mantel. I placed 3 things inside: the steel key I had worn around my neck for so long, the trust certificate with Claire's filing stamp, and a photograph my mother had taken of the cottage the summer before she died. Together, they told a story I could live inside. Not innocence, not revenge, survival with a spine. I hung the box and stepped back. The key no longer needed to sit against my skin. It belonged behind glass, not as a trophy, but as a promise. The house breathed in its own quiet. The walls held steady. Outside, the birches swayed, and the lake caught light like polished glass. My father's shadow existed somewhere beyond the gate. He did not stand inside. That line was mine to keep. And I intended to keep it. The story of the cottage is not over. It doesn't end with a gavel hit or a door slamming shut. It moves forward in small, careful scenes. A lock that turns and clicks. A shoreline held in place by stones and roots. A monthly receipt that shows up on time. A town park full of music. A letter placed in a file. A cousin's steady voice on the phone. A clerk who frowns at a bad signature and picks up the phone. An attorney who says your name like it belongs to you. A house that holds no secrets for anyone but you. I still wear the cord around my neck sometimes, out of habit. The steel key is gone from it now. The weight I feel is different. It's not fear. It's not the pull of old stories. It's the weight of something I chose. A boundary that lets me breathe. A home that I protect without losing myself. A gate that opens when it's safe and shuts when it isn't. Some days, I walk the shoreline and count the smooth stones and the small green shoots. I think about all the hidden roots holding the bank together. They don't look like much until a storm comes. Then you see what they've been doing all along. My father keeps paying. I keep recording. Claire keeps watching the file. Owen keeps showing up. The cottage keeps being what it always was at its best. A place I can belong to without being owned. A place I can keep without being kept. And every time I pass the shadow box, I see the key at rest. The trust paper crisp under glass and my mother's pick.